Rachel never hesitated when she saw the struggling veteran on the street. She reached into her purse and handed over her last $1,000, her entire savings. It was a simple act of kindness. But 30 minutes later, when a black SUV pulled up beside her and a high-ranking army general stepped out, she realized her life was about to change forever. Rachel sat on a worn-out park bench, clutching her coffee cup as the cool breeze brushed against her face. Her mind was heavy. Bills were piling up, her rent was overdue, and her job barely covered the basics. But none of that mattered when she saw him. An elderly man sat a few feet away, his thin, weathered hands gripping a cardboard sign. Veteran. No family. No home. Just hungry. Rachel swallowed hard. She had seen many people ignore men like him. Rushing past, pretending not to notice. She couldn't. Taking a deep breath, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, the last of her savings. Exactly $1,000. Her fingers trembled as she walked toward him. "Sir?" The man looked up, his tired eyes filled with something deeper than exhaustion. Shame. Rachel placed the envelope in his hands. "It's not much, but I hope it helps." His eyes widened. "Miss, I can't take this." "You can," she said softly. "And you will." Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't argue. He clutched the envelope like it was a lifeline. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Rachel said with a small smile. "Just promise me you'll eat something warm today." He nodded, unable to speak. Rachel turned to leave, her heart heavy yet strangely light. She had no idea how she was going to get through the month now, but deep down, she knew she had done the right thing. Then, 30 minutes later, everything changed. A sleek black SUV pulled up beside the park. The doors swung open, and a man in full military uniform stepped out. People turned to look. Whispers filled the air. Rachel blinked in confusion. Why was an army general walking straight toward her? He stopped right in front of her, his sharp eyes locking onto hers. "Miss Rachel Dawson?" he asked. Rachel's heart pounded. Yes." The general took a deep breath, then said something that made her entire world spin. "The man you just helped isn't who you think he is." Rachel's breath hitched. She glanced toward the bench where the old veteran had been sitting, but he was gone. Her pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" The general's expression was unreadable. "I need you to come with me." Rachel instinctively took a step back. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on." The general studied her for a moment before nodding. "Fine, but you should sit down for this." Rachel hesitated, then slowly lowered herself back onto the bench. The general exhaled. "The man you helped today isn't just any veteran. His name is Colonel James Harrington." Rachel frowned. "Should I know him?" The general's jaw tightened. "You should. 20 years ago, he was one of the most respected officers in the military. He led some of the most classified operations in history, saved countless lives. He was on track to become a general himself." Rachel's stomach twisted. "So, what happened?" The general's eyes darkened. "He vanished." She blinked. "What?" "One day, he walked away from everything. His career, his men, his life. No one knew why. No one could find him." The general shook his head. "Until today." Rachel felt a chill creep up her spine. The man she had just given her last $1,000 to had been missing for 20 years. "But why was he homeless?" she asked. "How does someone like that end up on the streets?" The general exhaled. "That's what we're trying to figure out. But one thing is clear. You did something today that no one else has been able to do in 2 decades. You found him." Rachel swallowed. I didn't." The general held up a hand. "Miss Dawson, I don't think you understand. That money you gave him, that kindness, it wasn't just a random act. It was the first real human connection he's had in years, and it may have just saved his life." Rachel's heart pounded. "Where is he now?" The general looked over his shoulder at the SUV. "He's waiting to see you." Rachel's breath caught. This morning she had woken up worrying about rent, about bills, about the weight of her own problems. Now? She was about to face a man whose story had been lost to the world, and she had no idea how deep this mystery really went. Rachel hesitated. Was this really happening? Just 30 minutes ago, she had handed a struggling veteran her last $1,000, thinking she'd never see him again. Now she was being told he had been missing for 20 years. Her hands clenched into fists as she exhaled sharply. "Take me to him." The general nodded. Without another word, he led her to the SUV. The moment she slid into the back seat, her heart pounded. Sitting across from her was Colonel James Harrington. But he looked different. Gone was the frail man clutching a cardboard sign. Now he sat upright, freshly cleaned, wearing a simple but neat button-down shirt. His sharp blue eyes locked onto Rachel, filled with something she couldn't quite place. Recognition. "Miss Dawson," he said, his voice stronger than before. "We need to talk." Rachel swallowed. "You remember me?" The colonel smiled slightly. "Hard to forget someone who changes your life in an instant." She felt a lump in her throat. "I just gave you some money. That's not life-changing." Harrington shook his head. "Number. You saw me." His fingers tapped against his knee. "Do you know how long I've been invisible?" Rachel stayed quiet. 20 years, Harrington continued. 20 years I've watched the world pass me by. I had everything once: respect, purpose, a home. Then one decision, one mistake, and it was all gone. Rachel frowned. What happened? The general, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. "That's what we need to figure out." Harrington disappeared in the middle of an operation. No explanation, no trace, just gone. Rachel turned back to the colonel. "Why did you leave?" Harrington's jaw tightened. "Because I knew something they didn't want me to know." A heavy silence filled the SUV. Rachel's fingers curled against her lap. "What do you mean?" Harrington looked at her carefully. "I can't say yet. Not until I know who I can trust." He took a deep breath. "But what I can tell you, Miss Dawson, is that your kindness today, it wasn't just fate." Rachel's brows furrowed. "What are you saying?" Harrington's lips pressed together, as if deciding whether to say what was on his mind. Then finally, he exhaled. "I know your father." Rachel's breath hitched. "What?" Harrington nodded. "I served with him, a long time ago." Rachel's stomach twisted. "That's impossible. My father was never in the military." Harrington's eyes darkened. "Is that what he told you?" Rachel's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a homeless veteran anymore. This was about her, and she was about to uncover a truth that could change everything she thought she knew about her own life. Rachel felt her entire world tilt. Her father? Connected to a disappeared military officer? That made no sense. She shook her head. My dad was an accountant. He worked at a finance firm his whole life." Harrington studied her carefully. "That's what he wanted you to believe." Rachel's hands clenched. "You're saying my father lied to me?" Harrington exhaled. "I'm saying your father wasn't who you think he was." Rachel felt her pulse quicken. This was insane. Her father was an ordinary man, wasn't he? She turned to the general, expecting him to dismiss Harrington's words. Instead, the older man looked tense, as if he already suspected the truth. "Colonel," the general said, his voice tight, "how exactly did you know Rachel's father?" Harrington's jaw tightened. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Because he was part of the same classified operation that got me erased." Rachel's stomach dropped. Harrington's fingers tapped against the seat as he continued. "Your father and I were on a mission 20 years ago. a mission that went sideways. But the difference between him and me? He gave a humorless chuckle. He got out clean. I didn't. Rachel shook her head. That's impossible. He was just a normal dad. Harrington's gaze softened. Did he ever talk about his past? Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it. She had never really thought about it before. Her father never talked about his younger years. He avoided old photos, changed the subject when asked. Even when she was little, something about his past had always been a mystery. Her breathing quickened. What was the mission? Harrington hesitated. Then he glanced at the general. I tell her, I put a target on her back. Rachel felt a chill crawl up her spine. A target? What do you mean? Harrington's expression darkened. You helping me today? It wasn't just luck. Someone was watching. Someone saw. The general stiffened. Are you saying? Harrington nodded grimly. They know she's connected to me now, and if they're still trying to bury the truth. He turned to Rachel. They'll come for you next. Rachel's breath caught. First, she gave a struggling veteran her last $1,000. Now, she had just stepped into a 20-year-old government conspiracy that had been waiting to resurface. And the worst part? She had no idea who she could trust.